Hello and welcome to A Christian Voice for Human Rights, one graduate's journey from YDS to Justice Ministry with Professor Jennifer Herdt and Allyson McKinney Timm. Hosted by the Center for Continuing Education. I'm Kelly Morrissey, the Managing Director of the Center, and thank you for being with us. I'm honored to introduce our speakers today. We're going to have some time for questions toward the end, so hold your questions till then, please. Professor Jennifer A. Herdt is the Gilbert L. Stark Professor of Christian Ethics at YDS. Her most recent book, Forming Humanity, Redeeming the German Bildung Tradition, was supported by a research fellowship from the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. She's also the author of Putting on Virtue, The Legacy of the Splendid Vices and of Religion and Faction in Hume's Moral Philosophy, and has published widely on virtue ethics, early modern and modern moral thought, and political theology. She serves on the editorial boards of the Journal for Christian Ethics, Studies in Christian Ethics, and the Journal of Religion. She's a senior member of the research team that received a $3.9 million three-year collaborative grant from the Templeton Foundation to pursue projects in science-informed theological anthropology. Allyson McKinney Timm is a human rights lawyer, scholar, and faith leader with 2 decades of experience defending the dignity and rights of those on the margins in the United States and globally. Allyson holds degrees in law and business from Georgetown University and received her Master of Divinity from YDS in 2016. She's the founder and executive director of Justice Revival, an organization she founded in 2017 to inspire, educate, and mobilize Christian communities to respond faithfully to the call to justice by standing in solidarity with the oppressed and defending the human rights of all. Her writings have appeared in Sojourns, California Lawyer, The Independent, USA Today, YDS's Reflections magazine, and others. Professor Herdt and Allyson, welcome and thank you for being with us.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you all for coming this afternoon for what I am looking forward to, a conversation today. Allie, it's just so wonderful to have you back, and I can't quite believe it's been, 6 years since you graduated and left us. And in the meantime, you have founded this tremendous institution and movement. And I just wanted to start by inviting you to tell us a little bit about what Justice Revival is, your mission, the work that you do, and then maybe take us into a little bit of the story of how you got to that work.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. It's a real honor to have the chance to talk about the work here at YDS, a place that has been really formative to me in this journey. Justice Revival, as you know, is a nonprofit ministry. We're a diverse, inclusive, ecumenical, Christian, faith-based nonprofit. And as you heard, our mission is to inspire, educate, and mobilize Christian action for human rights in the United States. And the way we do that, in brief, is by providing Christian education on the topic of human rights in a variety of ways, and by supporting and at times convening advocacy campaigns on issues like, at the moment, the Equal Rights Amendment, which is one initiative that we're working on with interfaith partners. So education and advocacy are the two kind of broad program areas that our work focuses on. And you asked, I think, about the journey of sort of how this came about. I was reflecting on this, and it's a long journey and a long story, but don't worry. I just want to share maybe 3 key vignettes that are pivotal in how Justice Revival came about. One was back in 2003, so a couple decades ago. I was a younger lawyer, working at a large law firm in the San Francisco Bay Area, doing work that was intellectually challenging, working with colleagues I really enjoyed. It took a lot of creativity, and so there were a lot of things that were satisfying and stimulating about that work. But at the same time, I just felt something quite palpably that I couldn't at the time put my finger on, but I had that sense that I imagine some of you can relate to, that there is something I know I'm supposed to be doing and I'm not quite there yet, but I trust and believe that it's out there. And so I started with the really simple adventure of prayer and trying to open up to what that might be. Now, fast forward, the second vignette was in 2005. I had already volunteered in East Africa on the Rwanda War Crimes Tribunal. I was leaving for Uganda to lead an office there to defend the rights of widows and orphans. And I had a moment that I'll never forget. I was sitting in the comfort of a Crystal City, Virginia cafe right outside Washington, D.C. And I found myself across the table from a woman I had learned to be a significant figure on the religious right and a significant opponent of the core human rights treaty to protect the rights of women. And I was perplexed because I'd been introduced to this person as someone who was concerned, as we were, about the plight of vulnerable widows and who was supportive of that work. But I found out at the very same time she was an arch opponent of the idea of women's equal human rights under the law. And I thought, oh, what's going on here? There's some kind of major disconnect. Either I have not understood something significant, or perhaps she hasn't. Where is the gap? And I was just desperate to try to understand, why are we talking past each other as Christians about an issue of fundamental justice? And then the third vignette, I would fast forward to 2010, after working in Africa for a number of years, came back to the US, took a teaching fellowship here at the law school just down the road, teaching human rights. And because we're hearing about post-colonial perspectives in the Beecher lectures, I wanted to bring in that experience where I had the chance to get a broader global perspective on the human rights work I had done. I had the chance to think about it critically from a post-colonial perspective and appreciate things I wish I might have understood before going to Africa as a white lawyer. But what it brought me to was a key question. What you know about human rights that you've presumed to share in other cultures, can you take that to your own culture of origin, which for me is North Florida, the Bible Belt, the Deep South. And so I really wanted to ask that question. Can I take what I feel I have to offer and share about human rights and take it right back there to the place I came from? And to me, that's still the challenge. And so I very much felt a call back to the US, and Justice Revival is the result of that.
It's so powerful to hear those stories. And I have to say that my experience of you as a student here was of somebody who just had such a clear sense of what you needed to do. So it's nice to hear that there was a process of discernment that happened before that. But I'd love to hear you now reflect a little bit on your time as a YDS student. What sorts of things did you feel that you learned here, or were there specific things that you came here to get to be equipped for the next stage of your journey?
Absolutely. YDS was so formative. It was so important because I came here with those really, those questions that just demanded an answer. What does Christianity have to teach us about human rights? What has our legacy and our history been in relation to the human rights movement? And so those questions were present with me through my M.Div studies. And a number of things stand out. One, the Christian history that I learned at YDS was incredibly important. learning about those heroes in our faith. So I'm thinking of Tisa Wenger's class, the Transitional Moments 2 class that she had just recently revised, and learning about De Las Casas, learning about Pauli Murray for the first time right here in YDS, taking Clarence Hardy's class on Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. And so seeing this cloud of witnesses, the Christian leaders who are exemplars in their heroic advocacy for human rights, and understanding that they were voices in the wilderness largely, very much voices from the margins, confronting both status quo outside and within the church with their calls for liberation. That was key. So learning our history, the readings class that I had the chance to do with you, that was a very important opportunity to even be able to participate in creating what the course would look like and going in depth with key thinkers like Nicholas Wolterstorff. So looking at his book, Justice, Rights, and Wrongs. And I mean, that I consider it a special privilege to get to speak with you in depth about that work and others. A lot of the student life here was very important to me. Being part of the YDS Women's Center, that was meaningful. Some of the activities that we did, I'm seeing friends here who were part of that, and remembering an event we put on sexual violence. So being able to look at some justice issues really in our local context, all of that together. Oh, and the last thing I wanted to throw in was everything feminist for me. It was Bible, pastoral care, theology, all of it. All of that was really important, as at times a kind of a re-education, in contrast to the limited religious education I'd had before.
Well, it's great to hear all the pieces that you know, clearly you came with a mission and you pulled pieces together that worked to support you in that. I remember our readings course too, and it was special experience for me. I also very much remember the conference on sexual violence, which was such an incredible, powerful conference that was student run, student designed. Terrific to see that. I wonder, you know, having gone through all of that and pulled those pieces together and so on, what, as you've gone into the work of Justice Revival, what would you say is kind of the general intellectual framework or intellectual foundation for the work that you do?
I would say broadly, it's a natural rights framework. And within that, it's relatively open in that we try to draw on the various bases for natural rights that different Christian theologians have emphasized, whether it's Wolterstorff and God's love conferring human worth, or others who are focused on the Imago Dei, or on the example of Christ's solidarity with humankind. And so trying to introduce the participants in our educational programs to the range of ideas that Christian thinkers have developed in support of the human dignity that is an agreed upon principle across cultures and religions, and an agreed upon philosophical foundation for human rights. It's also very interdisciplinary, and so I'm often thinking about the human rights legal philosophical framework in conversation with the Christian thinkers, and the theological approach. And then our trainings are also quite pragmatic, and so we're always wanting to offer participants some tools that are relatively accessible, some clear calls to action or opportunities to take what they're learning and put it into practice relatively easily, with some sort of campaign to support or way to be a part of a growing human rights movement.
So you don't hit them over the head with long books. Lots of philosophy.
I haven't yet. I haven't yet. Let's
Sounds
see.
wise.
Let's see what happens.
Well, can you tell us more about the work that you're doing in Justice Revival? And I think also you have other YDS grads involved in that work. I'd love to hear about that a little bit more and about how the work has been received. Because as you say, in a way, it stemmed from that moment of realization that there were Christians who were not supportive of human rights and how to confront that, right? How to work with that.
Absolutely. A lot of fellow YDS grads involved in the work, and faculty members and other community members. So our founding board of directors, 4 out of 5 had been affiliated with YDS in some way. And so from the very beginning, it was not just me, of course. It was a circle of friends who shared a concern. And we were founded in early 2017. So if you consider the political moment, it was very much a galvanizing moment. There was very much a sense that if something is to be done for human rights, really the time to act is now. And so this group of fellow graduates and I came together and started creating the organization, Justice Revival. Since then, a lot of our work has been developing Christian education programs and resources on human rights. We did that initially by teaching in churches, getting out, teaching education classes on Sunday morning, even traveling and just doing a lot of that. That was instructional for us too, and gave a chance to refine some of the curriculum. When the pandemic intervened, we pivoted to doing more and more online. So if you look at Justice Revival's website today, there are a lot of video resources, a lot of panel conversations we've convened on different human rights topics. And now our education is turning in an exciting new direction with collaborations like what we're doing through the YDS Center for Continuing Education, where I'll have the opportunity to offer a workshop this February 2023, which will be offered online and widely accessible. And so that's kind of the new frontier, and one that I think holds a lot of promise in that we're able to reach either current faith leaders or faith leaders in formation in their seminary years. The other side of the work, which I mentioned before, has been advocacy initiatives. Our biggest one right now is the Faith for ERA campaign. Justice Revival and about a dozen other groups. It's an interfaith coalition nationwide. We are advocating for the finalization of the ERA. You know the one, 50 years in the making. It's older than I am. And we're right on the precipice. There is a real path toward this being the 28th Amendment. But what is needed still is the political will and the social outcry to generate the political will to lead and to make this happen. And we're really glad for an opportunity to represent a voice of faith in favor of equality, along with a lot of other partners. So those are two of the big initiatives. And I think you also asked, how is all of this being received? The places where we've really seen it resonate the most have been with folks who are like-minded in that they tend to know the human rights field, maybe shared some specialty, and most readily understand why a project like this could be meaningful. Communities that have most directly felt the impact or the threat of human rights violations have also sort of been most inclined to appreciate why this would be a valuable initiative. We've also found a lot of resonance with interfaith partners who share common cause, and anyone who's been concerned about some of the views on the far right, the religious right, and thirsty for an alternative to maybe counteract that. That's been another place where it's resonated as well. we haven't been in direct dialogue with the folks, like in the vignette I mentioned, the woman I was across the table with. And so those opportunities are not ones that we've pursued yet, but that's still yet to be determined whether there is an opportunity for actual discourse in the highly divided kind of partisan environment that we're in.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you, you're really you're going with where there is resonance, where there is a welcome, and that's where you're headed. So I guess I'm wondering, looking forward, what you see as the major challenges as well as opportunities, like maybe the next 5 years of the organization.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the challenges I mentioned already that partisanship and division and the increasing difficulty of finding political solutions, the threats to our democracy, those are significant challenges, I think, for all of us, and especially for any sort of initiatives towards greater justice. I think a challenge is the way that sometimes justice issues are being siloed, particularly within the faith sector. So we might, the opportunity, the positive is that we have seen some measure of growing consciousness among some majority white congregations about the overwhelming reality of racial injustice. And so we've seen these years of awakening in recent years. The challenge, I think, is we still tend to talk about race in one conversation. We might talk about gender in another, sexuality in another, and we don't have as many conversations that are deeply intersectional and thinking holistically about the types of oppression, which of course are interrelated, and the types of solutions needed that would be liberating in a variety of ways. And that's, I think, a place where human rights can be helpful in giving a systematic framework and inviting us to think about these issues as interconnected issues, and that's one of our areas of focus.
Yeah, oh, terrific. Well, in a moment, I'm going to open up and invite your questions, so you can be thinking about what you would like to ask Ally about. But before I do that, just one last question: are there things that folks out here could be doing to be involved in your work?
Yes, absolutely. So many ways to be involved. One, invite us if you are interested in having a speaker, a sermon, a lecture, a talk, or a panel participant on these subjects of justice and human rights. That's one way we connect with churches. There are events that you can participate in even online. Our next educational event is coming up October 27th. We're going to be speaking about violence against women. We've got a really phenomenal interdisciplinary panel. In fact, another YDS graduate, Marie Fortune, is one of our panelists for that event. And these are open, these are free. If you miss it in person, you can find it on our website. And like I said, there are a lot of videos there, so hopefully resources that could be useful to you in your ministry. For students or maybe recent graduates, we have a job opening right now, a communications associate, a part-time position that we're hiring for. We have a lot of volunteer opportunities in areas of advocacy, communications, community organizing. So all of those are ways to be involved. And if you are able, consider making a gift. I'm not doing my job if I don't ask that. So as a nonprofit, we depend almost entirely on the generosity of individual supporters. So Give to Justice Revival, definitely give to YDS, which is hosting us for this phenomenal event. And seems like I had one other in mind, but those are the four that popped up.
Okay, if something else pops into your head, you can go ahead and break in and share that with us. So
Yeah.
we do have about 15 minutes for questions, so don't be shy. And I think Kelly is going to go around with a mic.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ally. This has been very informative. I was curious if the organization is focused on a particular geographic location, or what do you say is sort of the reach in terms of, yeah, where you're sort of based?
We haven't had a particular geographic focus, so we've worked with communities from coast to coast and even in between, and it's really been based on our network of relationships. So I mentioned the teaching we'd done in churches, and I think it's stretched across 7 states, 9 states, something in that range. The advocacy campaigns we have tend to be national in terms of the reforms that we're seeking. So in that sense, it's sort of structured so that no matter where you are, hopefully you could plug in and participate.
Thank you.
Just following up on that, I mean, it does sound as though it's U.S. focused.
U.S.
right?
focused.
And I mean,
that's
that
correct.
does, I think, come out of what you said when you came back from your work in Uganda, of feeling kind of a call to focus on the domestic situation. Do you foresee that continuing, or do you imagine there might someday be an international component to the work that you're doing?
I think for us, for the foreseeable future, I think it will continue to be domestic. And interestingly enough, sometimes that's part of what's thought provoking, because a lot of times when people hear human rights as Americans, our mind goes immediately to far reaches, far away places. And so to think about these universal principles of human rights, the power of applying them to the justice situations at home, that can help us think in fresh ways about the problems that we're facing here domestically. I have heard from Christian leaders in other countries who say, oh, we need something like this in Liberia. And because of the time I've spent in Africa, especially, my heart is drawn to that. And I can only imagine what it would be like to be in a position to be able to also sort of foster and encourage those efforts. I think practically, realistically, that would be a ways down the road for us, though.
Got a dream.
Got a dream.
Hi, hello. I'm Kaz Bem. I'm a pastor at First Church in Marlborough, outside of Boston. And it's a United Church of Christ congregation that's still so odd that a third of my congregation is Republican. Doesn't mean that they vote for Trump, but it's Republican. And one of the things I've been running into, I used to be a human rights lawyer in my previous reiteration of my life. One of the things I'm running into with my denominational materials is it is so repellent to them. Some of the language that they use, my denomination uses, they just shut off. Now, I could use that and lose them, but I think the role of a congregation is to change people's hearts. So are you a little bit more, I mean, I'm very tempted to look at your material and invite you, but have you worked with congregations that are so deeply divided? And so, because I think once you reach them, hearts are opened in church. The resources I come across are just so, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I hear.
I wish I was more articulate.
Partisan.
What's that?
The resources are partisan.
Yes.
Sounds like what you said.
And you're afraid, or you've experienced, that they could alienate
Yes.
parishioners who are Republicans. It's an important challenge to really be conscious of. I believe most of the congregations where we've worked are diverse, both politically and theologically. And so I'm always conscious of that going in as a guest. And of course, you try to learn as much as you can from the leadership of the congregation. My hope, I think, the sort of in the best case scenario, human rights offers us moral language that has this theological support and historical support in our tradition that can address the kind of lived challenges of injustice in a way that is a different approach than what we're getting from partisan politics. One thinker put this really well: human rights provides a moral framework with political implications. I think the challenge, though, is that we're in such a partisan environment that the resistance to the political implications remains, however thoroughly you justify it based on moral first principles. I hope I'm making sense. Yeah. And so, in other words, folks may be so predisposed to agreeing with what the kind of partisan leadership has mandated or is insisting upon. In some spaces, the language, the term human rights is already cast as partisan. It doesn't sound like you're in quite in that space, but still, I am hopeful that there is a human rights approach that is more focused on the theological foundations that might be more broadly appealing than what you've described. And let's talk more.
I mean, one of the interesting things that you and I talked about when you were a student here is a certain Christian pushback against the language of human rights, which in some sectors is perceived as secular language. But in a sense, if you can get over that hump, that is opens up doors for it not to be partisan. It's really an interesting situation.
And the irony then is, in the secular human rights law textbook, the critique is, well, human rights is this Western Christian framework that can't be applied globally. I always found that interesting, among other.
I had a question. So I'm really struck when I think of human rights, it makes me think of law and legality and advocacy that's transformational in that kind of way. And for me, as a pastor and a chaplain, I feel like a lot of my work is more in the weeds and working with a congregation that like very much believes in social justice, but maybe doesn't know how to help in more tangible ways beyond how to be in right relationship with people, but how to bring, change that is more sweeping, something like the Equal Rights Amendment. Like I don't find, we preach or talk about how to do justice, but we don't get specific when it comes to legality. And so I really appreciate how you are helping bring that language to folks. And I wonder if you could just speak more to how your strategies for helping Christians that want that work but don't know how to show up for it except for the human to human level, bring advocacy and change that has legal implications.
Great question. I think it's helpful and meaningful to start where people are. And you mentioned that human rights can seem like a very technical legal concept, and I see that and hear that a lot. One thing that we love to do is to draw out how much it is actually a relational concept. So Wolterstorff calls human rights a normative social bond. So we're really fundamentally talking about how we ought to treat one another. And sometimes the way I describe it is human rights gives us a concrete way to imagine a moral baseline in terms of what it means to have respect and regard for our neighbor, to move toward loving our neighbor as ourselves. And so developing the idea of human rights in that context, in terms of really thinking about how we're interacting, our social relationships, and then building from whatever the congregation is already doing. So I've found most congregations tend to be doing something to help homeless in their communities. And that's a way where people are already engaged. That was one of the reasons that one of the earliest campaigns we supported had to do with the human right to housing, and a group that had a campaign called Housing Not Handcuffs that is standing in opposition to the criminalization of homelessness, or the incarceration of people because they're homeless and trying to meet their basic needs. And so that's kind of one example of trying to find whatever it is that perhaps is a focus of missions already and using that as an entry point. But I think really on a nuts and bolts level, identifying a campaign that's already happening that has some practical tools. And essentially, that's what we've done at Justice Revival. If I've taught a course with 6 different issues, I'll kind of point to 6 different campaigns that other organizations are leading that are kind of the practical next step for taking action.
Thank you. I'm a United Church of Christ pastor in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I belong to a group or movement that you might be aware of, the Just Peace Network in the United Church of Christ. Many denominations have similar peace and justice networks. So the United Church of Christ, and I can give you more information after this panel is over, but it focuses on having local congregations make a covenant that are going to commit to justice and peace. Just peace is basically a play on the word of the idea of a just war theory back in the 300 AD, before our time. But this is a segue almost to what the conversation you just had was, how do we do things locally? So for example, our church in Springfield is a Just Peace church. And we started 4 years ago. The movement goes back to 1985, but we started 4 years ago. And we, in our Just Peace team, which in a congregation of 150, we have 24 members on that team. And they choose each year what issues do they want to work on to study, but specifically to work on in the local community. So I identify community partner organizations that are dealing with that particular theme. And they resonate with several of the themes you already have in the brochure, particularly to the Black Lives Matter. Racial justice has always been at the top burner there. But it's a way by which we move beyond charity and look at action. And so we work at growing. So the approach often with us in our group is that we look at what is our local church already doing in outreach of feeding the poor or feeding the hungry or something. And then what can we do this the next step to understand what are the structural and systemic causes of that particular issue, and then work on that. And so I'll talk with you more about how that operates. It's very successful because it's locally based, but with a national staff person in Washington, D.C., who's our staff person for the United Church of Christ. But it's a good model. It's working. And it's because we change, not always change, but we look at the issues every year. We're trying to keep contemporary what's really affecting us now. So thanks a lot.
I'm glad to know about it. It does sound like a very effective model and a lot to be learned there. And yeah, the more you can decentralize and empower folks at the local level to both, as you've described, choose the issue of focus, to research it and identify action steps, and then to empower them to create an action plan. That sounds like a way to really keep people motivated and give them a voice in it.
We might have time for one more if there is.
Hi, Allie. I'm Allison.
Hi, good to see you.
Conversation to have.
Yeah.
The word impact keeps going through my head. And as a nonprofit provider, I just think about what's the impact. And I'm particularly interested in how you're reaching young people, because I think our younger generation, younger than all of us in this, maybe not all of us, but some of us in this room, are looking for ways to get involved to change the world. And there may be a dotted line to a church because of family history, or there may be this move away from church. And so is your work kind of, can you see a way to draw in young people to reconnect them to the church and so forth through what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the themes of the conference has been new forms of education, and we were having some conversation yesterday that included digital media, and that's been one way for us of reaching younger communities, especially Instagram in particular. And it's been my younger colleagues who've led that because they certainly know it better than I do. And so connecting with broader audiences over social media, that's been one area of engagement. For us, by doing virtual events that are accessible, we have found that we've connected with people, and this was the additional audience I couldn't think of before, folks who might not be finding an opportunity in their local church to have the conversations that they're hungry to have about justice issues. Those have been a lot of the people who've kind of come our way and gotten connected with Justice Revival. And so I hope that that's a role that we, among others, are playing to kind of provide that for people who need it for whatever reason and can access it. What I'd love to do more of in the future is finding additional ways to foster community amongst all of us, remotely, virtually. Last year, we did an Advent service around Human Rights Day, and it was a worship event, virtual, online, and that was kind of one initiative. But I think there's more that we'd like to do and that can be done in the way of creating space for conversations and for kind of just collective reflection and action. Because like you say, some people are, they may or may not be engaged regularly with a local parish, but they're still seeking community. They're still seeking a way to live out the gospel or to deepen their spiritual lives and to make a difference for justice. And so, finding ways to help address those needs is certainly something that is top of mind.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming and for your good questions. And Ally, I want to thank you for the work that you are doing and for making YDS proud.